a quiet small town in Tennessee, where neighbors know each other by name, where life feels safe and predictable. And then, one summer night, that illusion shatters forever. For people murdered in cold blood, a baby girl left alone in the silence, crying in the middle of unthinkable horror. And at the center of it all, a young man who claims he's no killer at all, but an undercover agent on a secret government mission. Is he delusional? Is he evil? Or is the truth something even darker? Stay with me, because this story will take you inside the heart of a tragedy, a courtroom battle, and a town that will never be the same again. Music drops into silence. Title card fades in, the Drummond case, Baby in the Shadows. Dyer County, Tennessee, a stretch of land where the fields seem endless and the summer heat clings like a second skin. It's the kind of place where life moves slower, where people nod to each other on the street, where the loudest sound on a July night is the chorus of cicadas rattling in the trees. This wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to hear about on national news. But that summer, the silence of Dyer County was broken by something so shocking, so devastating, that it ripped through the fabric of the town and spilled into headlines across the world. Neighbors recalled that night as quiet, almost too quiet. They hadn't heard screams. They hadn't heard gunshots. Life outside had gone on as if nothing had happened. But inside one modest house, tucked back from the road, something unspeakable was unfolding. 4 people, dead. A family wiped out in the space of a single night. And a baby, just 7 months old, abandoned but alive, her cries barely carrying beyond the walls that had become a tomb. When deputies finally arrived, what they saw would haunt them forever. The air inside hung heavy, smelling of gunpowder and blood. The stillness was oppressive, broken only by the thin, desperate cries of the infant who should not have survived. An officer rushed to her, scooping her from the chaos, holding her trembling body against his chest. "She's alive," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "She's alive." It was in that moment that the story began to change. This wasn't just another crime scene. It wasn't just another act of senseless violence. It was a horror story wrapped in mystery, one that would capture the attention of millions. Because at the center of it all was a man named Austin Drummond, 28 years old, with a face that would soon be plastered across every news broadcast and every social feed in America and beyond. His mugshot would become the symbol of the unimaginable. But when police put him in cuffs and sat him down in an interrogation room, what he told them was something no one could have expected. He said he wasn't a murderer. He wasn't a monster. He was an undercover federal agent. And this massacre was part of a mission. The detectives stared across the table in disbelief. And the world couldn't look away. To understand Austin Drummond, investigators had to peel back the layers of his life. What they found was not the profile of a trained agent, nor the portrait of a cold-blooded career criminal. What they found instead was a man whose world had cracked, one fracture at a time, until reality itself seemed to collapse. Austin grew up in Dyer County. His childhood wasn't marked by extraordinary events. He wasn't the golden boy everyone adored, nor was he the troubled kid no one trusted. He was somewhere in the middle, ordinary, almost forgettable. But in his 20s, something began to shift. Friends noticed it first. He started speaking in riddles, dropping hints about missions he couldn't explain. He claimed people were following him, watching him, waiting for him to slip up. He warned of corrupt forces hiding in plain sight. Some laughed it off, brushing it aside as paranoia. Others felt a chill when he spoke, though they couldn't quite explain why. Small towns have a way of looking the other way. You don't press too hard. You don't ask too many questions. People said Austin was just going through something. But no one could have predicted how far he was slipping, or how violently it would end. In the interrogation room, Austin's delusion came alive. He described in detail how he'd been recruited. He spoke of surveillance operations, of assignments no one else knew about. His voice was steady, his conviction chilling. These weren't family members, he told detectives. They were operatives. They'd been compromised. I had no choice. Detectives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew the victims. They knew their faces, their histories, their humanity. They weren't operatives. They weren't spies. They were people, real people with lives, with loved ones now gone. The more Austin spoke, the deeper the rift became between his version of reality and the truth that lay before investigators. When his background was combed for evidence of federal employment, there was nothing. No records, no pay stubs, no connection whatsoever. Instead, what emerged was a man drifting through unstable jobs, a man buried under debt, a man whose relationships collapsed under the weight of his paranoia. The truth was tragic in its own way. Austin wasn't a soldier on a secret mission. He was a man unraveling, and no one had stopped him before it was too late. In the town, guilt began to creep in. Neighbors wondered if they should have spoken up when they noticed his odd behavior. Friends replayed conversations, looking for signs they'd missed. He wasn't right, one woman said softly, staring into a news camera. You could see it in his eyes. But no one thought it would come to this. No one ever does. The victims were mourned. Their funerals were heavy with grief, their names etched into the memory of the community. And the baby, the one who had survived, became both the reminder of the horror and the fragile symbol of hope. In every story of tragedy, there is something or someone that becomes the symbol of everything lost and everything left to fight for. In the Drummond case, that symbol was a baby girl just 7 months old, with cheeks flushed red from crying when deputies found her in the house of death. Those who were there that night never forgot the sound. It wasn't just a baby's cry. It was a desperate plea for life, echoing through a silence that had swallowed everyone else. An officer rushed toward the sound, and when he lifted her into his arms, he felt a jolt of both relief and heartbreak. Her survival was a miracle, but what she had been left among was unforgivable. News of the baby's survival spread faster than the details of the murders themselves. People across Tennessee, across the country, across oceans, were caught by the image of a crying child left alone, a survivor who didn't yet know what survival meant. Strangers online wrote prayers, posted candle emojis, and sent donations. The baby who lived became the phrase attached to every headline. But beneath the surface of that hope lay something much heavier. What did it mean for a child to carry this story? What would it mean when years from now she grew old enough to ask where her family had gone and why? For now, she was wrapped in the arms of relatives, cared for, protected. But everyone knew she would grow up in the shadow of this tragedy. One day, someone would have to tell her the truth, and that truth would never stop hurting. In the town, people gathered for vigils. They lit candles, not just for the lives lost, but for the one life that had somehow endured. Mothers held their children tighter as they prayed. Fathers wiped their eyes, ashamed of the tears that came too easily. The baby, too young to understand, had already become something greater than herself. The vessel of both grief and hope, a reminder of the worst night the county had ever known, and the only spark of light that night had left behind. The world would move on eventually, as it always does. But for Dyer County, that child's cry would echo in memory forever. As the shock of the murders rippled outward, attention shifted to the courtroom. Here, inside the walls of justice, the story of Austin Drummond would be dissected, scrutinized, and broadcast for the world to judge. Austin sat in silence most days, flanked by his defense team. His face gave little away, sometimes smirking faintly, sometimes staring blankly at the table before him. The prosecution painted him as a cold-blooded killer, a man who had taken the lives of his own family without remorse. The defense countered with a different story, that Austin was not in control of his mind, that he was lost in delusion, so deep he could no longer separate fantasy from reality. When the jury listened to his recorded statements, the courtroom chilled. His voice was steady, almost calm, as he described his so-called mission. He repeated his claim. They weren't family. They were operatives. They'd been compromised. The words hung in the air like smoke, unreal and suffocating. The prosecutors pushed back hard. They brought photos of the victims, played videos of family gatherings, showed the jury birthday parties and Christmas mornings. These were not operatives. the lead prosecutor thundered. These were people, flesh and blood, mothers, fathers, children. He chose to end them. He chose to leave that baby behind. Reporters filled the benches, typing furiously, cameras snapping each time Austin lifted his head. Outside, the story was dissected on talk shows, debated on podcasts, spread across TikTok like wildfire. Was Austin truly insane? Or was his undercover agent's story nothing but a cold attempt to escape punishment? Inside the jury box, faces were unreadable. They listened, stone still, as expert witnesses debated his mental state. Psychiatrists described paranoid delusions, fractured reality, the possibility of schizophrenia untreated. Others argued it was too convenient, that Austin knew exactly what he was doing, and simply wanted a story wild enough to sow doubt. The courtroom became a battleground between two realities, the one Austin believed, and the one the rest of the world could not ignore. But through it all, one question hung heavier than all the others. Was he insane or was he evil? The answer would not just determine Austin Drummond's fate. It would shape how a grieving town and a stunned nation remembered this tragedy forever. When the courtroom doors closed each evening, the echoes of the case didn't stay trapped inside. They seeped back into Dyer County, into the gas stations and diners, into the quiet pews of the churches and the crowded aisles of the grocery store. Everyone in town carried the weight of what had happened, as though the air itself was thicker, harder to breathe. In small towns, memory has a way of lingering. The house where it all happened still stood, its curtains drawn tight, the grass growing taller with each passing week. People crossed the street when they walked by, their eyes darting but never settling on the windows. No one wanted to admit it out loud, but the house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by the memory of what it had witnessed. Parents who once let their children play freely outside now watched them from porches. Doors that had gone unlocked for decades were now bolted, deadbolt, sometimes even chained. Trust had fractured. The comfort of "it couldn't happen here" had vanished forever. But in the heart of that fear lay something else. Whispers. Theories passed in hushed tones at vigils, in Facebook groups, in the corner booths of diners. Some swore Austin had been spiraling for years, that people had seen it in his eyes. Others whispered about drugs, about secret grudges, about forces darker than anyone dared admit. Online, the story exploded into endless speculation. But the people who lived in Dyer County didn't want theories. They wanted answers. They wanted to understand how someone they knew, someone they had waved to in passing, could become the source of so much destruction. And then there was the baby. Her name was on everyone's lips, though few outside the family circle would ever see her again. She was the one who had survived, the one who had been carried out of that house into the flashing lights of squad cars and ambulances. For many in town, she became a symbol, a reminder that even in the darkest of nights, something fragile and innocent could still endure. At vigils, her picture was placed among flowers and teddy bears. At church services, her name was whispered in prayers. She was a miracle, they said, but she was also a burden the future could never lift. One day, she would ask questions. One day, she would want to know why she was spared. And when that day came, what answers could anyone possibly give? The tragedy of Dyer County wasn't just the lives lost. It was the way it changed everyone left behind. The baby, the neighbors, the officers who walked into that house. All of them became permanent witnesses to something they could never unsee. And no matter how many years passed, no matter how many times they tried to forget, the silence of that night would always return. The day of the verdict drew the town together once more. The courthouse was packed, the air stifling with anticipation. Reporters lined the steps outside, their microphones angled toward the heavy wooden doors. Inside, family members held hands so tightly their knuckles whitened. When Austin entered, dressed in a plain shirt and slacks, the room seemed to tilt toward him. He kept his gaze forward, expression unreadable. The jury filed in, their faces pale, their eyes shadowed by the weight of what they had carried in deliberations. The judge's voice was steady, but the room itself seemed to hold its breath. Guilty, on all counts. The word rang out like a hammer striking iron. Some wept openly. Others exhaled the grief they had been holding in for months. The prosecutor nodded once, his jaw set in grim satisfaction. Austin barely moved, only blinking as though the word had bounced off him without landing. The defense had fought to paint him as a man lost in madness, incapable of knowing right from wrong. But in the end, the jury had seen through it. To them, it didn't matter if he believed his delusion. What mattered were the lives he had taken, the family he had shattered, the baby he had left alone to cry in the dark. For Dyer County, the verdict was both an ending and a beginning. Justice, in the eyes of the court, had been served. But justice could never bring back the ones who were gone. It couldn't erase the images from the minds of the first responders. It couldn't stop the baby from one day learning what had happened. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as the statement was read. "This community has suffered a great loss," the sheriff said. "But we have seen resilience, too. We will heal. We will remember. And we will protect the innocent left behind." His voice cracked on that last word. Innocent. Everyone knew who he meant. The baby had become the thread pulling this story together. The proof of survival. The reminder of hope. The echo of innocence in a world too often darkened by cruelty. She would grow up with questions. She would grow up with scars no one could see. But she had also grown up with a town and eventually a world that had claimed her as their symbol. The silence of Dyer County was broken forever that night. But in the silence that followed the verdict, there was something else, something closer to peace. Not complete, never complete, but enough for people to breathe again. This case will never stop haunting those who lived it, and it will never stop raising questions that may never have answers. Was Austin Drummond insane, or was he simply evil? What does it mean for a baby to grow up as both the victim and the survivor of such a night? And what scars does a town carry when trust itself is shattered? If you found this story gripping, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who follow true crime. And let us know in the comments what you think. Was Austin a man broken by delusion, or a monster hiding in plain sight? Your voice matters, and your engagement helps us bring you more stories of pain, survival, and the search for truth. Thank you for watching.